have actually is called the crony capitalism. So the businesses, and it's very well known, I mean, the businesses and the government and the banks are all in the game. And when I say terrible rates, I'm not talking about 10, 15% loss. I'm talking about 80% loss, 90% loss, because some people just needed the money. That our government was never honest or transparent about the finances. And only 1 week before the lira started collapsing, there are statements that say that the financial system is all fine. There are literal statements saying, do not take your dollars out of the bank. Everything is great. And I was relying on my savings. Those were worth 80,000 US dollars. And right now, they're worth nothing because I can't even access them because they're in a savings account.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Risk. Today I have a great guest, someone who we can learn from, someone who's been through some pretty traumatic times, things that could happen in any country at any time. Ali Chehade, welcome to Risk. How is it and where are you?
I'm right in the middle of Beirut, Lebanon.
There was quite an explosion there I think it was last year, right?
There was a big catastrophic explosion in August 2020. And it couldn't have come at a worse time because of everything going on in Lebanon and the world, which is affecting Lebanon.
Did they ever determine what caused that explosion?
Things in Lebanon get very political very quickly, and it's people don't even believe that we will ever know. We will, if at all, take any verdict because that's how corrupt the system is.
So why don't you tell us a little bit of the politics and what Lebanon is like? I mean, it's a fairly westernized country, or has been for a long time. It's pretty diverse religion-wise. Is that correct?
True. So Lebanon is a very globalized country. Lebanese people, on average, are bilingual. Some people are trilingual. The Lebanese people are very well-traveled. I mean, definitely not everyone, but in general, Lebanon is known to be one of the countries with the biggest number of expats. There's more active Lebanese citizens outside of Lebanon than inside Lebanon. And that actually is one of the main sources of revenue for the country, people sending in money from abroad. Our political system is one of the most liberal, if not the most liberal, in the Middle East. It is a democracy, but as you might imagine, it's not really a democracy because the actual political scene is more of a ruling class scheme. So you have the ruling class that has been ruling Lebanon for the last 30 to 40 years. And those people are the same. We do elections, we elect our parliament members. Those are all controlled by those political parties. And we only elect our members of parliament, which are 128. Our government and our president are selected by negotiation and agreement, which is a very weird, to many people, this is a very weird system. And it has its problems. That's why we sometimes spend literally years without a president because they simply sat on a table and could not agree on a president. That's why we spent the last 13 months without a government, because let alone agreeing on a president, you need to agree on a whole cabinet. And it took them 13 months. And they usually negotiate over certain seats. And there are some hot seats, and those are the seats that you can make the most out of by being corrupt. Those are the seats that, like the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Power. So there's a lot of money in those ministries, so they always fight over those. As well as the Ministry of Interior, which pretty much controls the security over the country. This is also a seat that they always fight over.
Now, you
So yeah,
mentioned the
that's
Minister of Finance. Well, let's get into the economy of Lebanon a little bit. I'm assuming you have a central bank there, and who is it
we do
controlled
have a
by?
central bank. There was one central bank, but Lebanon is one of the countries with the most banks per capita. We have a lot of banks. Tourists are always shocked at the number of banks we have. They're like Starbucks. On every corner, there is a bank. And we have banking secrecy. So banking information are hidden even across bank branches. So I can only do major transactions with the branch that I opened my account in. So we also have on the outside of it, we have what looks like a free market. But I just learned recently that what we have actually is called the crony capitalism. So the businesses, and it's very well known, I mean, the businesses and the government and the banks are all in the game. And that's what creates a lot of the problems that we live and that we still live. That is why today the official rate of the Lebanese lira to the dollar is still 1,500, while in real life, if you wanted a dollar, you will pay 20,000 Lebanese liras for it, just to create more grounds for striking deals, making benefit or making profit out of the difference in prices that is offered to the big businessmen to import and then to resell in Lebanon at very highly inflated prices.
So let's talk a little bit about the lira. I mean, I know that's been a really big issue there.
It's the one of, I mean, it's the issue right now. Yeah.
It's everything, right?
Right now, it's everything. It is what is crippling the whole country.
And how is that crippling the country? What's going on?
So until 2 years ago, the lira and the US dollars were pegged. So the lira was pegged to the US dollar. We had a dual currency economy. We used both currencies interchangeably, even in everyday transactions, no matter how little it is. We used all denominations of the US dollars except for the coins. You could go to a grocery store and pay with dollars, and it was totally fine. People used to do that because the price for the last 25 years never changed. It was always stable to the dollar. What we later on, I mean, to be able to maintain that without a productive economy, because if you look at the Lebanese economy, we do not have really major sources of US dollars. Our sources for US dollars are people putting US dollars in the banks or people transferring US dollars into Lebanon. So it's not really a productive economy. So a lot of US dollars was being, the whole financial system was being engineered, just keep that peg. And it eventually collapsed in October of 2019, and the banks just closed out of nowhere. We couldn't go into the banks. And then 2 weeks later, after opening up, we discovered that we are not allowed to access our money, which, the story being, so our banks give all the money to the government. That's how the banks make their interest. So the government takes loans from those banks. Essentially, the bank does not have enough liquidity, and there's no independent body that regulates the relationship between the banks and the government, and that's where the evil stands. Until, with all the corruption, with all the dollars pretty much just used or smuggled or stolen. Because
going back to 2019, let's paint a picture of everyday life. You're going about your business and you need money. You got to go buy groceries or whatever, and you go to the bank or you go to the ATM card. You put it in, You can't get
You
anything
could
out?
take liras, you could take dollars. So all our ATMs use liras and dollars. So depending on how you have your money in the bank, most Lebanese people would have two accounts, one where they store liras, one where they store dollars. It really depends. Some people just always convert one to the other, depends on the personal choice. Yeah, you could just go pull like $20 from the ATM or liras, and it
But
really
it
didn't
sounds like that.
matter.
It sounds like that changed, and you weren't able to do that anymore.
Exactly. So not only we could no longer pull out of the ATM, but even like speaking to the tellers, even if you had your money. So we're not talking about credit. We're talking about your money that is in your current accounts. At first, we had very extreme limits, like you could only pull out $100 a month from your dollars, and eventually that just disappeared. We could not even access those dollars at all until the government started creating all kinds of, I mean, the central bank, which is controlled by the government, started creating all different kinds of notices to the banks with different price rates. So some people could get their dollars in liras, either for 1,500 liras to the dollar or for 3,900 liras to the dollar if you had put the dollars after the collapse started. So if you put dollars or received dollars into your account after October 17th, 2019, they would give you your dollars back, except in a very, very, very deflated rate. So your dollar in the real market is now for 20,000, but you can only take it for 3,900. You could no longer take it as dollars just because. And that was one of the ways or the tactics the government and the central banks used to liquidate all their dollar liabilities from people. A lot of people pulled out their dollars as Lebanese liras at terrible rates. And when I say terrible rates, I'm not talking about 10, 15% loss. I'm talking about 80% loss, 90% loss, because some people just needed the money.
So in other words, you put in a $10 bill, a U.S. dollar bill, into your bank account, and when you go to pull it out, you're getting $2 worth of
Exactly.
Lebanese
Lebanese.
money.
Exactly. I mean, before 2 years ago, you could pull out your $10 as $10. Right now, that's no longer an option. So yeah, you would pull out what's worth $2 in real market value.
So what are people doing now? I mean, is this still going on?
Oh yeah, it is still going on, and I mean, we're still diving. Um, what are people doing? I mean, some people make dollars, and those people are kind of the happiest people right now because the rate of currency inflation when compared to the rate of market inflation is much faster. So the currency is inflating much faster than the market. So people who have dollars actually have much bigger purchasing power right now. Some people in Lebanon make dollars. Some people have savings in cash in dollars. Those are also sort of fine, except it's not as sustainable. And then you have the other part, which are people who work and get their money in liras, which is the majority of the Lebanese people, or people who are jobless. We are passing through the biggest economic depression in Lebanon in decades. A lot of people are jobless. They rely on friends and family to get their income.
You know, I'm a little confused here because say you're making $100, you're working for whatever company, they're paying you in U.S. dollars. That goes into your bank account, $100 in
No,
bank
so
account, but you can only take out $20 in equivalent.
okay. So local companies that pay in US dollars started resorting to paying in cash if they have that accessible, because
Okay.
companies and individuals had their money, stuck at the banks. People who work, most people who still actually earn in dollars are people who work for either multinationals or international NGOs. And those get what we call the fresh dollar. The fresh dollar is the sexiest currency you can have in Lebanon right now. And that is the real dollar. That is a dollar that came into Lebanon from outside the system, because we still are able to use the Lebanese dollars, but now we call them lolars, like Lebanese dollars, and they have a different value. So if I get paid by an international company and they transfer the money into a Lebanese bank, I can access that money in dollars. So all people are I'm one of those. I just go and pull them, not even keeping my money at the bank. No one trusts the banks anymore. I just go and pull them out instantly whenever I get any transfer. Or a lot of people use international transfer agencies like Western Union, MoneyGram, and those sort of things. Those are still paying you in fresh dollars if you get a dollar transfer from abroad. So if a Lebanese company is paying you in dollars, so they are paying you from their dollar account. So that is not a fresh dollar. That is a Lebanese dollar that's stuck within the Lebanese financial system, and it's worth much less. Some people started selling accounts. Like, I'll sell you my account that has $100,000 in it for $20,000.
Wow. And that's because they just need money.
They need money, and, so they start bargaining on accounts.
So going back to 2018, 2017, life's pretty normal, and you're not expecting any of this stuff. And I mean, were there any warning signs?
I mean, it's always been, Lebanon has not been doing economically well for a while. But things in real life did not seem as bad as they were. And one reason behind that is that our government was never honest or transparent about the finances. And only 1 week before the lira started collapsing, there are statements that say that the financial system is all fine. There are literal statements saying, do not take your dollars out of the bank, everything is great, from government officials.
Right.
And, I mean, when you talk about the masses, there's no reason not to believe that, no matter how corrupt your government is. You always think that, oh, it's a government. They're not going to make that big of a mistake. But apparently they did, because things were not transparent. Some people saw that happening, but it was more of an analysis. Like, people would say that, oh, we are reaching a wall. We are hitting a wall. But no one expected it to happen that quickly, that suddenly. No one had solid data about when will this happen or how will it happen. We only know that we're not producing enough. I mean, Lebanon's not doing well economically. A lot of people are out of jobs, but we never knew that this will happen, especially when we were always made to feel safe about our savings. A lot of Lebanese people have savings in their banks. It's part of our culture to save money. And I was one of those people. I was jobless for a couple of years before the collapse started, and I was relying on my savings. Those were worth 80,000 US dollars. And right now, they're worth nothing, because I can't even access them because they're in a savings account. I never know. I have no idea if I'll ever get those back. So that was one of the, one of the things that made the problem much bigger. A lot of people have savings. We tend to use banks. I mean, I know in some countries, banks might be looked at as a secondary service. But in Lebanon, it's something that's part of your life. People use banks to put their money. A lot of people have put their savings in the banks because they also started offering like crazy interest rates that can get up to 20%. I mean, crazy numbers. Like, if you think I'm mistaken, no, I'm not. It's as crazy as it sounds. And when I used to travel and ask my friends around the world, like, how much do banks give in interest rates? And I lived in the States. I mean, you'd be lucky to get like 0.5%. It just didn't make sense. Like, how come my bank gives me like 10%? Well, we realize what it is. That's why people call this to be like the biggest modern Ponzi scheme, because they literally lured people to put their money into banks. And months before the actual collapse, banks would call you and would tell you, like, hey, you have this much Lebanese liras. If you convert them to dollars, or if you get us $50,000, we will give you a better rate. So banks were actively encouraging people to put money into the system. And that was just
but
months
put
before the
dollars,
collapse.
U.S. dollars, and not lira, right?
Yeah, they wanted dollars. So they always were encouraging people to put their US dollars. If you had liras, they would encourage you to go and exchange those liras for dollars because you get a better rate. So people would exchange those liras for dollars and then put them in the bank. And this was actively happening just months before the collapse, which shows you that there's something sinister about it. It's not.
They knew it was going to happen. I'm assuming. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, a country does not get bankrupt out of nowhere, right? You're talking about billions of dollars. The country today does not even have money to pay for fuel for us to get electricity. We don't have enough money to subsidize medicine, to subsidize all the basic needs. Like, where did that money disappear? Like, yeah, it doesn't happen overnight.
So, looking back in your own personal experience, what would you change in terms of your financial situation? Where would you put your money? What would you do?
Oh, personally, I was taking some of the worst decisions. So I was one of those people who, at one point, for some reason, the interest rate was higher on Lebanese liras. And I think because they wanted to take your dollars. So at one point, they wanted your dollars. So they would, if you had $10,000, they would tell you, look, if you let us convert that to liras, you will make more interest. And I was one of those people who, I was like, that's nice. Like, I had 8% interest. The amount was not that big. So today, I would definitely be more cautious. The first thing I would do is I would actually diversify because, I had no legit investments outside of my savings. And that is what actually hit me the most because all my money was in one place and it just disappeared. I would definitely diversify. The other thing, but being realistic, it's really hard to see it coming. You always think it's not going to get worse. Like when the dollar became 1800 to the lira, this was the first time in 3 decades for that to happen. It never got to 1600. It never got to 1580. I mean, when it got to 1800, that was like a historical thing. And people thought that it's not going to get worse. People are like, this is the worst that it could get. We all thought that if it ever got to 2000 to the dollar, people will be on the streets, like That's crazy. You already lost like 30% of your savings. And it took me a while to realize, no, we are like just going into a spiral. Unfortunately, until today, the dollar to the lira has gotten to over 20,000 liras for the dollar. And you still have people who think it's not going to get worse, which is very ironic. I mean, it definitely talks about the psychology of those people and the way they deal with their risks. Because the longer you say it's not going to get worse, the more risk you're taking. I had a chance to actually liquidate my savings account, which was in Lebanese liras, when the dollar was for 1800. But I couldn't do it because that was me taking a 20% loss, which is a lot. You know, that's like my $80,000 is now 50, 55, 60, whatever it is. And that's a big hit. That's like a car's worth of money. I couldn't do it. And I thought, what if it gets better? And look where we are today. I wish I actually did that. I mean, if I could sell my liras for 10,000 to a dollar, I would do it right now, let alone 1,800. Because it was early on, and I was one of those people, just like everyone, thinking it's not going to get worse. But with time, this category of people who think that it's not going to get worse just keeps shrinking. But they always exist. You will see them. You will see people who think that it's not going to get worse without any solid reason to believe so. Some people are naive. Some people are hopeful. Some people just do not want to admit the hole that we're in. They're, you know, the ostrich hiding in the
I think
under the ground.
that's a universal trait of humanity, because we see it everywhere these days.
They always look at this as something that's passing. And I mean, if you can afford doing that, by all means. But that unless you actually realize and admit that you are living through a crisis, through a big problem, you will not be able to take actions that would reduce the risk.
So let's talk about everyday life, how it's changed. Have products disappeared from the shelves? I mean, we're seeing that here in the States, where you go into certain stores and a lot of shelves are empty. They're not as full as they used to be. Some products you can't get.
Oh, definitely. So everyday life, definitely the social life has taken a big hit because of different things. So many people are leaving Lebanon. At least 80% of my friends have left Lebanon in the last few months. Things have gotten way more expensive everywhere. And there is this generally depressed feeling across the whole country, and especially in the city of Beirut and in cities in general. They're very depressing. A lot of businesses cannot afford opening, whether restaurants, pubs, nightclubs, where, you know, the social life happens. Those have been cut by at least 60%. Because they couldn't afford reopening, especially after the explosion and after COVID. It's like hit 1, hit 2, hit 3.
Yeah,
a lot of businesses
we've actually had the exact same thing happen here in the States. A lot of businesses, restaurants, nightclubs, they've disappeared.
Exactly, because they went into such a deep hole that they just couldn't recover. And add to that the fact that there's literally less people in the country, so your market is shrinking. People have less purchasing power. Businesses have became very reliant on people who have access to US dollars, because when you see someone having a burger at a restaurant, that person makes dollars. I mean, it's guaranteed, because today, an average Lebanese salary would barely get you 10 pizzas.
Wow. And
I mean,
you're talking about
if
for
you
a
are
year?
ordering a pizza,
Are
you
you
are
talking about a
privileged.
year salary? Like a full year of
No,
salary?
a
What do you
month's
think?
salary.
A month, okay.
I mean, we're still not as inflated as Venezuela or Zimbabwe, but I'm talking about a salary that used to be worth $1,000 is now worth $80.
Okay.
So, and I'm talking about cheap restaurants. So the minimum monthly wage in Lebanon is 675,000 liras, which used to sum up to $450. Today, that is only around $30. So if you go to a fine restaurant and have a two-course meal, you will be paying a minimum wage worth a month of minimum wage for your meal. And that's how you know that anyone who's, I mean, going to good restaurants has access to US dollars, because if you earn in Lebanese, you cannot afford it. Transportation is no longer affordable, because just last week the country removed all subsidies from fuel. So you used to fill your car. So I used to fill my car for what's worth $50, which used to be 75,000 liras. So 75,000 liras was $50. I still fill my car for worth of $50, but now that's around like 1.5 million Lebanese liras. Even public transportation, which is barely existent, we rely on like private public sort of system, very expensive. A lot of people stopped going to their work because it literally costs them more money to go to their job than the money that they make out of their job.
No, that's
Literally,
crazy.
like it's more expensive. Whether you want to fill your car or whether you want to use public transport, it's more expensive. So businesses and the public sector are trying to figure out a solution to this. Like, how do we get people to come to work? Because the government has not yet passed a law to increase wages, even publicly. There's talks about that, but they're being very careful, because I'm pretty sure they know what that would mean to the economy and to the inflation. The private sector is more flexible. So some businesses have been doing a hybrid payment mode, whereby they give you like $100 in dollars, and then the rest of your salary is in Lebanese, or they give you in Lebanese dollars, which are worth more than the Lebanese liras, but less than the actual dollar. So the private sector is sort of like trying to navigate it, but they're still like struggling. A lot of businesses are just closing down.
So are you
Everything, like
able to get like daily necessities? I mean, has that been an issue? Just getting
daily necessities, you can get it. We are still at the phase where you could solve most of your problems with money. At one point, we had a major electricity outage problem. It was, right now it's sort of half solved. We still have a lot of electricity outage. We still have a lot of lack in medical stock, drugs, medical supplies. A lot of people cannot find basic medicines that they need. And the main reason being, medicines are paid for through the government. And a lot of medicines used to be subsidized. Now, a lot of those are half subsidized. But still, some people cannot find their meds. They often rely on friends coming from abroad to bring them some of the very basics. I mean, until one point, you couldn't even get a basic painkiller at the pharmacy, because that's where corruption plus, so that's where public corruption and private corruption meet, because a lot of businesses know that prices will inflate. They know that we're going on a downward spiral. So why would I sell you this pack of painkiller today when I could sell it to you for double the price next week?
Okay.
The same thing happened.
The product inflation moved that quickly, like a week to next week?
Yeah. And especially sometimes it's not because of the currency inflation. Sometimes it's because of the subsidy, like the stopping subsidies.
Right, right.
So the petrol station has, let's say, 100,000 liters of fuel. And the petrol station knows that next week, the government will remove subsidies and fuel price will become ×3. So they would close. They would not fill your gas. That's why we had long lines. Sometimes you had to wait for like 6, 7, 8 hours. Some people would sleep in their cars the night before, like as early as 8 p.m. and not even knowing if this gas station will open. They're just taking the gamble. Because those people know that certain restrictions or certain subsidies will be lifted, so they will be making more money. And this also reflected on everyday goods. So far I've been talking about necessities, but even when it comes to chocolate bars, you would go to stores and they would hide their chocolate bars, the ones that are, big brand names, because they know like next week subsidies will be lifted of that category of food. So they would be able to sell you that for a much higher price. There are brands that you don't see anymore, yes, especially in smaller grocery stores. I mean, you no longer see, can I say brand names or?
I guess.
I mean, you no longer see your Kit Kats and your Bounties, because those are very expensive right now. If you go to big supermarket stores, you will find them. It's just much harder to come across, because if you're in a small neighborhood, where people are not, especially outside Beirut, no one's buying these. They're very expensive. And you also start seeing new brands that you never heard of before, low-grade brands. We've always had like Turkish chocolate, because we're close to Turkey, we've always had that, but we always had the good Turkish chocolate. Right now, even the good Turkish chocolate is expensive. So you start seeing very low-grade brands. You start seeing the really bad Turkish chocolate just to make it slightly affordable, because even the worst Turkish chocolate right now is more expensive than the most expensive chocolate we could buy 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that, I'm assuming that is true in many different product
Exactly.
categories.
I'm talking about chocolate as a simple example, but exactly, it applies everywhere. Electronics, we started seeing brand names we've never heard of. Chinese cars are on the rise. Lebanon, for the past 6 months, have sold, on average, only around 50 to 100 cars, I believe, per month. New cars. Because a lot of Lebanese people used to buy cars through loans, and banks are not giving loans anymore. Even if you had savings, you have no access to your savings. So most of the cars are actually being sold to big businesses. Actual average Lebanese people who are buying their cars are probably, you could count them with your fingers and toes, maybe. But that's why we're starting to see a rise in Chinese cars, because they're much more affordable. if you're willing to put that investment right now.
Wow. Now,
Yeah.
Lebanon is in the Middle East, but Lebanon's in the Middle East, but you're not an oil producing country, but you're not far from oil producing countries. I mean, you would think that petroleum products would be pretty inexpensive there. Were they in the past? Has that changed, or has it always been a little bit more expensive?
So in the past, it was okay. The prices were just okay. They were not cheap. They were not cheap, definitely compared to oil-producing countries, but they were partially subsidized by the government. And a lot of the government taxes, the government got a lot of income from taxing fuel. So at least around, I don't want to be giving inaccurate information. So around 40% of what we used to pay for gas, which is car, petrol, or diesel, was direct taxes to the government. So it was inflated for the government's benefit. But I mean, it was accessible. It was not a problem compared to how much people would make. Recently, there are talks about Lebanon becoming an oil-producing country. There has been Total, the petroleum company, has last year a couple of years ago, came into work on some research on oil reserves. We definitely have research that shows that we can produce oil or at least gas. But again, it's one of those things where corruption plays a big role, and it just got slowed down terribly because of the political, economical, social crisis that's hitting Lebanon. But again, it's one of those things where...
Are people able to like leave the country and find goods in surrounding neighboring countries?
Not that easy. So the only neighboring country which Lebanese people have relatively easy access to is Syria. And they're in a worse shape. I mean, it's working the other way around. So a lot of things, because we have very high subsidies by the Lebanese government, a lot of essential goods were being smuggled into Syria, because you could buy a gallon of fuel in Lebanon, let's say for $10, but then you could go to Syria where the gallon of fuel is worth $100 and sell it there. So official estimates say that at least 30% of the fuel, that was a number I heard from a researcher in the field, at least 30% of the fuel that was coming to Lebanon was being smuggled into Syria because of the government subsidies. Well, right now it's much better because they lifted all the subsidies. So apparently there's not much benefit